let me just first make, sorry. We first make everyone co-host first.
I'm gonna message. We will begin shortly.
So many people.
Yeah. Okay. So should I open the we'll
Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're just going to get started in one moment. I'm just making sure everyone's connected to our audio. Let's see. All right. Thank you so much for being here with us today. We are the White Coats for Black Lives, the UCSF-UC Berkeley Joint Medical Program chapter. Today, we're talking about personal statements, and we're just going to get started. So we are 3 out of the 5 founders, and we have now extended our network to include JMP1s, and most importantly, our fellows, who honestly have made this program far more amazing than I ever hoped it could be. So we are really excited to be here with you all today and have you join in with us. Our goals are to strengthen the pathway connections between URM pre-meds or underrepresented pre-meds and medical school. And so we provide long-term mentorship, part of which is the seminar series, in addition to our mentee mentorship program. And we're also offering scholarships this semester. And so please follow us on our social media. We are on Instagram, Twitter. We have a website and an email. Please reach out if you ever have any questions. And we have, thanks to our social media team, we have a beautiful social media account. And so I hope you are all connected to us in that way. All right, and I'm going to pass it off to Haruna.
Sure. Before I get started, do the fellows want to introduce themselves really quickly?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Ayumi Lasende. I'm currently the Pathway Development Fellow. Super nice to meet y'all. I'm a 3rd year at Berkeley.
Hey everybody, my name is Samhar Teklu. I'm the Fellows Director. I'm a 4th year at Cal, and let's see, I'm studying molecular and cell biology, and yeah, thank you all for being here today.
Awesome. And Camila, if you wanted to introduce yourself as well, Maricon, and then I can go ahead and start the slides.
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Camila Hurtado. My pronouns are she and her. I am a 2nd year in the UCSF-UC Berkeley Joint Medical Program, and I'm really interested in health administration and policy. So currently I'm studying different policy solutions to make insulin more affordable in California. Okay, I'm going to pass it to Maricon.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Maricon Jiro. I go by she, hers. I graduated from Berkeley in 2018. I'm also a 2nd year alongside everyone here. I'm interested in addressing eye health disparities in medical education and in my research. And now I'll pass it off to Haruna.
Hi, everyone. My name is Haruna. I use she, her pronouns. Also graduated Berkeley in 2018. My majors were in molecular and cell biology and social welfare. Currently a 2nd year at the Joint Medical Program as well. And my primary focus is research in health policy, particularly in health administration and how we can improve systems to care for people who are experiencing homelessness. And my work has revolved around a lot of street medicine in San Francisco and around the Bay Area. So it's very nice to meet you all. And with that, we can move to the next slide. So today's agenda, we are going to talk about the personal statement, what that entails, what the other parts of the primary application entails. So that's the activity section. And we'll open the floor to questions, and we can share these slides with you at the end, since there's a lot of good redacted examples of what a personal statement and activity section might look like for various people. But we won't go through all of those examples today just because there's a lot of them. And we will instead open the floor for specific questions that people have about the primary application. So with that, we can move on to the next slide. So this is just a brief timeline. It looks a little bit, it could be very overwhelming to look at this chart. But basically, the primary application opens in June. And so you want to have, if possible, application material ready for the primary application by June. Ideally, a lot of people say it's good to submit your applications early, when it first opens, but really the grace period is like from when it first opens to, I think, about 2 weeks into 1 month in. I think that is the ideal time to submit, but you could submit as later than, you could submit it September, October as well, but ideally June is a good time to submit those applications. There are a lot of fees associated, and I think some of those you can submit a form through AMCAS to get the financial waiver, but there are some fees associated. And yeah, so we are talking primarily today about the primary application. Any questions on the timeline? We can move on then to the next slide. So the AMCAS prompt for 2020 was use the space provided to explain why you want to go to medical school. And so the available space for your response is 5,300 characters, which is about 1 full page. A lot of the questions are really, why have you selected the field of medicine? What motivates you to learn more about medicine? What's driving you to go to medical school? Like why is it that you're doing medicine, right? As opposed to, being a social worker or other jobs or other professions that also are really important in caring for people and their health. So I think having that explanation somehow in your primary application is really critical. Other things to think about: what do you want medical schools to know about you that hasn't been disclosed in other sections of the application? So you don't necessarily want to just regurgitate what you'll be putting in your activity section, because that's there for the activity section, and you want to highlight all these other things about you that wouldn't necessarily be in your application otherwise. You could also include information like unique hardships, challenges, or obstacles that could have influenced your decision in pursuing medicine, or your educational pursuits. You could also comment on significant fluctuations in your academic record that aren't explained elsewhere. You do have a section oftentimes to talk about that, but if you wanted to, if that was critical to your decision in pursuing medicine, or it really shaped your path to going into the medical field, it could be something that you can write about as well. And so what does that mean? So again, you should really, really think about why medicine. Why is it that you want to be a physician, a MD or DO, as opposed to all these other professions, and really illustrate this passion that you have through your experiences. And it's important to tell a story. Anecdotes are really helpful. So meaningful experiences. Oftentimes, I personally started off my primary application with a meaningful experience I had when I was growing up, and then how that has shaped my decision to pursue my double major in, particularly with a focus on social welfare, and then a particular focus on street medicine, and my experiences in college with street medicine, and how that has shaped my interest in becoming a physician and an advocate, for different health policies. So that kind of was the story that I told, and everyone else, has individual stories, but it's really impactful oftentimes if you have certain anecdotes that you remember from various experiences. It's also important to also address what you plan on doing with your medical degree. Why is an MD, or if you're pursuing a DO school, like why are those degrees the ones that you are interested in, as opposed to being an LCSW or a psychologist, and all those various other professions that are also amazing. And again, it's important to illustrate that having this degree is not the dream, but rather a means to accomplish larger and more impactful dreams and achievements that you have for, I think, the overall impact that you would have on the world and society would be the broader goal, right? And not just the medical degree. So it's important to illustrate that as well. And so logistics, keep the language simple, use regular grammar. It doesn't have to be all super fluffy language and really complicated words. I think keeping it simple and keeping that story succinct while telling everything that you need to tell, which is easier said than done, I think that is the most important. It's also not necessary to repeat other parts of the application unless it is really, you think it's really critical to how, again, you developed your thinking around medicine. And again, this essay is going to be sent to all the schools you're applying to. So it's important to make sure you proofread and everything. Have your friends and mentors also read it too to give feedback. And again, yes, finally, what are they not looking for? It's not a list of activities, because we have a whole section for that, right? Where we have 15 spaces to talk about 15 different activities, which we don't have to do all. We don't have to fill that all up, but we have so much space to talk about that. So really, this is just a space for you to tell your story about why you're interested in becoming a doctor. And with that, I can pass it on to Maricon.
All right. Thanks, Haruna. So lastly, this section is about how to write about difficult events. First and foremost, you do not have to share anything that you don't want to. It can be a very traumatic process if you are going to relive and talk about trauma, and also just knowing that what you have experienced will probably be asked about also in interviews where it's an open file. So just make sure you're okay talking about it, especially later on down the line with your interviewers. And if you do decide to do this, just focus on you and how the event impacted you. A strengths-based mindset helps, meaning really focusing on what happened and how you've overcame that event, or how you've grown from that event. So what skills did you gain? Did it impact your grades? What did you learn from those events? And again, if it impacted your grades, then it would be a good time to give context for those grades and what you learned to improve from them. And then, of course, in the end, include how the event impacted your decision to become a physician. Next slide. Great. So I have the honor to read some of my classmates' applications. And these are real examples of an introduction and some personal statements. But before that, I just wanted to clarify some things from earlier. Since we were operating under like old timelines, I would like y'all to check out this pre-med calendar. And actually today is when the application cycle opened for the pre-meds for the 2022 application cycle. And then the submission opens on the 27th. So you can start submitting applications on that day. Okay, so I'm glad that I was able to talk a little bit about that, and I hope you all were able to read a little bit of this, but I really want to highlight some of the underlined statements. And this one statement is, I was left, the first underlined statement was, I was left, after talking about a difficult situation, this writer talked about how she felt in that situation, and how that may have affected her decisions about going into medicine. And she's also inserted this part of like what she did. and tying it back to her other experiences. So like here through this, they talked about being a medical chart abstractor at the SFDPH, and how what happened to them relates to the stories that they've seen. And then this person also added a reflection statement, like, looking back, I was fortunate that I found my voice and resilience to remain in care and be my own advocate. And then in the end, the last statement shows what this person is thinking of doing as a physician. And so, like, from this introduction, it really talks about the reflection of what happened, the feelings that this person had, to give us like more context, and then the why medicine, like a why medicine statement, and how they're going to be in medicine. Next slide. All right. So this is another example of addressing grades. And though again, this, you'll have time to read it once we send out these slides, but this slide really highlights the strength-based mindset, speaking about the successes that they've had, maybe with a dip in a grade, and how they overcame it. So like that second underlined statement, to overcome these challenges, what did I do? I developed strategies, time management, collaboration with others, and then what they've done since then, showing a progression in their character. And this is an example of a concluding paragraph. And again, this is just really reiterating maybe some of the big key points from your personal statement, and also kind of giving the readers an into what you're going to do with your medical degree. So like this one, I want to integrate my education and experiences with a medical degree so I can become a physician that can address societal factors, build meaningful relationships within and beyond the US. So you can see, okay, this person wants to work globally, locally, and also systemically. And of course, there's we were at this moment all just talking about the personal statement. There's also a section that is available where you can talk about your about things that may relate to being a disadvantaged applicant. And so this can be if you feel like you've had to overcome adversity due to economic, racial, religious, gender, learning disabilities. If you're an immigrant, issues in your life, you can consider checking this box, and then you can provide even more context about your experience. Yes, and so for many of us, this process can feel very weird, and also very something like very unfamiliar, because at least for myself, I felt like I didn't really reflect all that often, and especially I wouldn't reflect and then share it with many different schools. But just know that this is a very important process, so that med schools can really understand where you're coming from, and it can feel slow, but just take your time, give yourself like a month or 2 or 3 or even more if you need it, or less, and it would really help you. And yeah, and I think the next slide is I think at this point I'll pass it on to Camila.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mary-Con. Right, so this is a little bit, so the personal statement is a little bit different from your activities, as Faruna mentioned before. And so when it comes to your personal statement, it really helps if you do talk about those activities, you really explain why they contribute to your reasons for attending medical school. So when it comes to talking about, so now switching over to the 15 activity section, this is a separate section from your personal statement, but it's still considered part of your primary application. And so within this specific section, you have 15 entries to enter all of the hobbies, work activities, any kinds of awards or publications, anything that you've done really during your undergraduate career and post that, or after your undergraduate career. And so for these 15 entries, for the most of them, you're going to have around 700 characters to explain what they are. But 3 of those of 15 are going to be considered meaningful experiences. And in those cases, you're actually going to have an additional 1,325 characters to explain why it's meaningful. And so something that is important and you want to keep track of as you go throughout your undergraduate and after undergraduate career, if you take a gap year, is certain information that they're going to be asking you. And so they will be asking about when you started this, like this, let's call them, well, activities, when you started this activity, when you ended it, the total amount of hours that you contributed towards this activity, your organization name, and then any kind of contact name that they may reach out to confirm. And so along with that name, they're going to want a title, an email, and a phone number. It does help. If this is information that you haven't been keeping track of, don't panic. I don't think I personally did not know this is what was going to be asked. So I didn't keep track of any of it, and I really had to go back and look at my emails. But also if it's a, last ditch effort, what I've heard you can do is also like put down the information of anyone, any kind of a friend or colleague who also did this activity with you, who can confirm it. And at last resort, you can also put down your own name if you need to. What's also really important about this 15 entries, because it can sometimes be very daunting, is that you actually don't have to use the entire 15. You really want to focus on the ones that really contribute, meant something to you. And use that 700 characters to explain why it meant to you or how it meant to you. Like, what did you gain from it? Did you gain a skill? Did you gain a sense of a broader understanding of what health disparities look like on a broader level? Like, it helps if you, just put one quick sentence about describing what it is, and then a follow-up sentence of what you gain from it and how that's going to either why it makes you want to go into medical school, and or how it's going to make you a better physician. So here are really quickly very few examples, although we won't dwell on them for very long. So this is an activity entry. Notice all the information that they're going to be asking you. Highly recommend you keep track of this as you progress. And then also when it comes to shadowing experiences, you can just put all of those experiences into one entry. And so here you can essentially just put family medicine, and then the name, and then the email of the physician or physicians that you've shadowed. Same with clubs. You can also put your participation in multiple clubs within one activity. If you have more than one. So here's an example of that. And then here's an example of the meaningful activity entry. And so they will ask for an experience description, and then they'll give you those extra 1,000 characters of why and how this is meaningful. And so just to note again about feedback, it is really important to get feedback. So it's great if you are able to get, show your material to someone who you know and someone who knows you personally, because you do want to make sure that this is you, this represents you, and it sounds like you, since these schools will be meeting you virtually or in person. And then it also helps to have someone who may either be a professor, a mentor, any kind of physician you've ever worked with. Sometimes, it just kind of depends on the relationship. Anyone who you really trust is going to be able to provide edits and who is invested in your success. And so it helps when you do ask for this feedback, you ask them specifically what you're looking for. Like, are you looking for grammar? Are you looking for flow in terms of flow of ideas? Or are you looking for is that, any kind of thing that you specifically know, so that way they know exactly what you want you want from them, essentially. It also helps if you keep track of your versions, and you can do this through I personally use Google Docs, and the outline function in Google Docs. So for that way I could go from version to version to version. That way I didn't lose anything. And of course, it kind of helps you incorporate all of the different feedback that you get from people. All right, thank you. And with that, we're going to open up the floor to any questions. I'm going to stop sharing, but I can always share my screen again if you have any more questions. We would really just love to hear like anything really. It can be personal, can be generalized to people. We're here to help.
Yeah, and also I know that you may have received an email of us being open to edit your personal statements, and so I think we still have some space. So feel free if you have one already to share that. And Ayumi posted the Google Doc, so feel free to fill that out and submit a personal statement that you want edited.
It could also be the activity section as well, or any sort of writing sample that you would want us to look at. Yeah, and oh, one thing I just really wanted to add was that what has been really helpful for me, because when someone asked me as an undergrad, why did you want to go to medicine? That's like a very loaded, big question that is hard to answer in one sentence, right? Hard to answer also sometimes in a whole essay too. But what was really helpful was like talking to a lot of mentors or people who were in the field, and people who are not in the field, about why they were in that particular field. And then I had a running like note, like on the iPhone Notes app, I had just like running bullet points of, what people were talking about and why they were really passionate about being an ER physician or like being a social worker or, being a psychologist. And that was really helpful for me because it was just a stream of thoughts and sometimes it didn't make sense, but it was nice to have this to look back on when you were about to start writing your application. So anyway,
Yeah,
yeah.
I see that Brian had his hand up if you'd like to ask your question.
Yes, thanks so much, Guy, for going through all the tips and for writing the letter. I have questions about so some of the activities that I wanted to include in the personal statement. I also plan to talk about it on the activity session itself. How do you guys recommend, like, at what point that we should just like cut off on the personal statement and like save it for the activities if you don't have like a lot, because like a lot of activities I found that's meaningful and it's guiding me through like, why I want to become a doctor. But I feel like it would be repetitive if I just saying the same thing over again in the personal statement and activities.
Karuna, go ahead.
Oh, for me, okay. Well, I was just really quickly going to say that I think it's fine that you have something parts from your activity section that are in the personal statement. I certainly had that in mind, because I was part of the suitcase clinic as an undergrad, and that was really, really formative for me, in figuring out why that I wanted to become a physician. And I think what's helpful was that the activity section was really just an overview of what what I did as this one particular position in this one particular org and why that was meaningful, just broadly. And then in my personal statement, I still talked about the suitcase clinic, and you still have to introduce what it is and generally why it has been impactful. But I think it was more specific because I had a particular anecdote from one instance in the clinic that I had, as opposed to saying broadly that the whole year and a half, whole 2.5 years that was part of it was meaningful, if that makes sense. And I'd love for Camila and Maricon to add on to that.
Sure. I would just like to echo everything you said. I think the meaningful activities is great for specificity, and then when it comes to that personal statement, that's where you really kind of bring out how exactly this activity contribute to you being a doctor. And it does, as I was saying before, you can also include a little bit of a snippet of that into your activity section, just to kind of say like, hey, I gained this insight, or I gained these skills, which is going to make me a stronger physician always. But right, that personal statement is really meant for you to hone in on how these experiences affected you fundamentally and really drive you to become a physician. Yeah.
Yes, I definitely think my colleagues here have said everything that I wanted to say also. But going back to like what Haruna was saying, I think it took me a while to answer this question because I was looking at my application, and what I did was also just kind of explain like my position and like what I did. So let's see, like one of the things that I talked about was being a Fung Fellow, and then in the personal statement, I talked about how that really helped me um, build my personal like relationships with people who I'm working with, also my problem solving skills. And then on my activity section, I talked about exactly what I did and like the skills that I gained, and also like all the steps and the things that I did in order to like have research, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like much more detailed and kind of much more explaining the skills that I got in my activity section with a little bit of why it's meaningful to me.
Got it. Thank you so much.
I saw that Shrija had their hand up for a while too. If you'd like to ask your question.
Sure. Well, thank you all for the information so far. It's been super helpful. I just wanted to ask, how would you recommend writing about an upcoming gap year experience in the activity section or the personal statement or anywhere in the application if it hasn't started yet? But you're gonna like I'd be doing it for a year, so probably would be a good idea to include it somewhere.
I can start with this one. Right. So when it comes to sometimes it comes down to timing. And so you can definitely try to work this in. However, if it's going to be something that you really do think is going to be a defining part of your experience, then maybe that you can incorporate that within the personal statement. I would not include that in the activity section because they will be asking for dates. I mean, I don't know. Actually, feel free to disagree. Runa and Mary Khan. I think in terms of timing though, on the overall picture is that you will be asked secondaries, and that'll be another chance for you to explain what you're doing in that moment. And that's where you can definitely talk about the activities you are currently doing. And then when it comes to, so even all the way up to like interviews and past interviews, you can always reach out and update your medical schools and let them know through emails, essentially like, what you're doing, what you're excited about, and that way it'll really get them. And then they'll ask you for any documentation if they need that. Like, for example, I had to update them about my job. And they went back and asked me to get the signature for my boss, and I was able to do that. And so that was fine. But you're always, there's always an open door. So that way they can keep you can always reach out and communicate what you're doing.
Yeah, maybe just adding on to what Camila said, I know it can be, I think what I did, just because I was a little worried, because I'm not sure if something was really going to happen in my gap year or not. Um, I only put the ones that I knew, that I was already doing, and then I knew I was going to continue anyway, and then I put that on my activities section. But if it's but if it's a new thing and I'm starting into it, and I can't really speak too much about it because it's not really an activity of the past and I didn't add it. But what I did was what Camila said, once it's in the interviews season and I got an interview, then I would update them with what I've done.
Okay, thank you all for responding. Haruna, did you have something to add on? Oh, okay, perfect. Yeah. So Crystal sent this question in the chat. How did you figure out how many hours you did for each activity, or what was the minimum amount of hours for an activity you included in the section / how many activities did you include? And I can resend that in the chat as well.
I can start. I don't quite remember the minimum amount of hours. I'm so sorry. I can look back. I do remember being able to fill out the 15. But I really included the things like my hobbies as well. And I really did say these are skills that I learned from my hobbies and are, of course, going to contribute to me being a better physician, right? An example of that is that I love dancing, and I'm a dancer, and I've performed since I was 5. And so, it does so I was able to flip it, right, frame it, and basically say like that essentially those like performance skills really help in terms of like could help in terms of like communication and like being and a sense of professionalism. And so those, you know, framing it in that kind of way can really help make a strong case of why even those hobbies have helped you become a better physician. Yeah.
Yeah, I also filled out all 15 activities, but that's just because I feel like I could speak to all of them. There are many folks who did not fill out all like 15 activities and got into medical school, so don't feel the pressure to fill out all 15. And for me, um, I didn't really have a minimum. I just felt like if it was something that was important to me, I put it on my activity section. And if it was related to like medical school and like to show like what I've done in medical school, like I put that there. So like there was one where I talked about physician shadowing, and for one of them, I had like I guess it was 20 hours or so, and that was maybe one of my like um least amount of numbers that I put. And then of course I had sections on presentations and posters and honors and awards, and those like I mean those were like no hours at all. So um so yeah, that's my experience for me.
I actually only filled out 13. And I think really if you have over 10, I think that's really solid. Um, yeah, and some of them were hobbies. I'm looking back at it now and I see some that were also like 50 hours total, but that was a particular project within this organization that I was a part of for a very long time. And so Camila and Mary Kwan were mentioning that you could merge everything together from like all your experiences from one organization or multiple organizations into one activity section if you think that you want to write about all these other things, and that combining everything into one would save up that space. But you could also, if you feel like each of those individual experiences were really unique and formative, you can also separate them. Like you can, people I know have separated being a student instructor for an organization with, and that was one activity, but for the same organization, they were also later down the line like co-president or something, or some other position, and that was a different experience that highlighted leadership as opposed to like interest in teaching. And so you could totally separate it out. You don't want to separate it out too much just to make, you don't want to separate it out for the sole purpose of just trying to get 15. But I think there's no really like right number, but yeah, I had 13 with some hobbies as well.
Okay, thank you. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Wait, I'm so sorry, Yumi. Is it okay if I add on?
Oh yes, of course. Mhm.
Thank you. Okay. I think also I definitely want to stress any kind of work experience that you've ever had. Like not a lot of people are able to shadow or able to do clinical experiences because they have to work, right? But that is really important. Like that is still completely valid. And if anything, really should be stressed within this application because it makes you a stronger applicant, right? It shows that you have that professionalism and you have that work experience. And so don't feel afraid of like, don't be afraid of putting down whatever you've been doing. It is really a great way for medical school applications to see what you're capable of doing and like the work that you do. And I think it really does make you like a really strong applicant. So I also want to like say that.
Thank you for stressing that because I'm a student worker as well, so it's nice to know. Someone DM'd me this question. It's pertaining to like timeline stuff. So personally, when did y'all take the MCAT, like the month, and what cycle were you applying for? I think that's what the question is asking.
I think I remember when I did it. I took an MCAT right after my junior year, and I did not do so well, and so then I applied again. And so then I did it again the winter break of my senior year. And personally, And personally, for my experience with that, I would really try to give yourself space to study for the MCAT. I worked while taking the MCAT and I gave myself too little of a time. And so I would have, if I could go back, I would have maybe given myself a longer time frame to study because I knew I was going to work just so I can dedicate time for it. So that's my experience.
I also took it the summer after junior year, and then applied once I graduated. And then, then I had one gap year while doing interviews. So if you're planning on going straight into uh, medical school from undergrad, which I personally highly do not recommend, I think having a gap year was really formative for me and for a lot of people that I know. But if that is your plan, then you would have to take the MCAT earlier than that. Yeah, and I totally agree with having dedicated time to study. I had 1 month of not doing anything but study for the MCAT and take care of myself. And it was pretty miserable, but but that was just the way that I had to do it for myself, at least. And then I also had a semester during spring semester of junior year where I started looking at study strategies, but I wasn't necessarily dedicated to completely just studying the MCAT because obviously we had the semester and classes and everything. But yeah, that was my experience.
Yeah, and then I actually did it the summer after I graduated, and so and I took 2 gap years, and so that during that first gap year I did master's, and the second gap year I worked at a federally qualified health center from my hometown in San Diego, and so so I knew for me, like honestly, like I coming out of Cal, my grades weren't the best, didn't do the best in sciences, right? And so I knew I needed that extra time to study for that MCAT because it was I was very stressed about it, about my chances of getting into med school. And so I think it came out to like 2 months to study for that MCAT. And it was like, in terms of a schedule, I think I tried to study like 5 days a week. It came out to like 5 days a week, 2 days off. And it would alternate between like 4 hours to 6 hours a day as much as I really could. And then I would take like practice exams. And I think I took maybe like 7 practice exams with the fall. So once you take a practice exam, you have that follow-up day to be able to go through it. And so like that was essentially a schedule. And for me, it worked. But everyone's schedule is different. And so, so don't be afraid of like retaking it. Everyone retakes it. Everyone does. And so it's just a matter of trying to like figure out a time like when you can be dedicated and really focused to it, because it's not going to be fun. At least for me, it was not fun. So you definitely need to like prioritize your self-care and your like stress management, so that way you're able to get through it and take it when you can.
Thank you all for answering. Brian asked the question earlier. Do y'all have any insight about applying this cycle based only on your application without the MCAT score at the time of submission? Is it something y'all would think is worth a shot, or do you know anyone that has done that successfully last year?
I personally don't know anyone who has done that. And I really can't speak to how things are going, like in terms of the changes due to the coronavirus. That might not be as helpful for that question, but I don't know if Mary Condon can know.
I think I know of a few who applied without an MCAT and have received interviews to interview at a medical school. I haven't looped back in with them yet to see if they've gotten into a medical school. But I think that even getting an interview to a medical school is pretty big, and so I mean that might I don't know what's gonna happen to them, but like yeah. So that's like anecdotally what I know.
Right. I'm not quite sure. I'm not, yeah, I don't feel comfortable answering that question just because I don't know anyone. I can't even give anecdotal experience. But I can say, following up from MaryCon, is like if they do interview you, they are seriously considering you. So it's not, it's not something to bypass. Like that is a serious offer or consideration. But right. Sorry. Maybe we can ask amongst the JMP ones and try to get that info to you.
Okay, I will note down Brian's name and email and then have us get back to them. This is kind of a follow-up question. I don't know if it's the same thing, but what if you've taken the MCAT, but your score isn't back yet? What are your thoughts about applying without having your score?
I think it's ideal to have your scores back before the application gets reviewed and sent out to all the schools, because MCAS receives your primary application, and then I think you technically have to have all the material for them to start reviewing, and then send out to all the schools. So even if you submit, but this is before the pandemic, so I really don't know how things have changed. So take this with a grain of salt. But before, that's what the situation was. So you could submit everything, but you still need the MCAT score for it to be processed, I believe, and sent out to all the schools that you apply to. So the schools themselves wouldn't get your application until you submit your MCAT score. So ideally, like if you're submitting, it opens this time May 28th, and if you have the like 2 to 4 week grace period after. I submitted mine once, as soon as the day it opened. I think I submitted mine like 3 weeks in, so like 3 weeks later from the application open day for submission. And it would be ideal, right, if you have your scores by then. But you could technically send in your scores later. It just then is a matter of like all the other people being processed first.
Okay, sounds good. Then we move on to the next question. Udochi, you've had your hand up for a while. Would you like to say your question out loud?
Yeah, I understand that we're moving into the MCAT area. I don't want to like mess up the flow. My question was more about the personal statement. Is it okay if I add that in there? Yeah, so my problem with the personal statement is like trying to be unique from like the other applicants. And I know a lot of people are going to talk about their shadowing experience and whether I did like clinical. And like when you wrote your personal statements, how did you make yourself different from other applicants or more unique? That way you can stand out?
Oh, I can touch a little bit, Camila. This is a advice that I got even when I was applying like for colleges, was that if someone had dropped your personal statement, like if you had dropped your personal statement without your name like somewhere on campus, and like a friend picks it up for you, like even though it doesn't have your name, like if they read it, they would know that it was from you. And so like I think that just goes to speak that it's not really about like making yourself like, I guess, stand out, or I guess be different, but also just like really honing in on like um why you want to do medicine, and like what is it about your path that can really that made you think about medicine. And so I mean, like for me, like yes, a lot of people talk about their research, or like yes, a lot of people talk about their shadowing experience, but they didn't experience that same shadowing experience as you, and they didn't feel the same things that you did, and like think the same things that you did. And so I feel like that's one way you can um you can make it more personalized for that personal statement for you.
Yeah, going off of Maricon, I think when I think about it, I don't think I even mentioned my shadowing experience. I think for me it was mostly like for me it was more of like an explanation of like this is where I come from and this is who I am, and like and essentially like who I am is really related with my family, right? Like, and I have a lot of family, we have a lot of stories, like we're very close. And so it was not, but the thing is too, it gets complicated because you also have to focus on yourself. So it's like focusing on yourself, who am I? I feel inherently very connected with my family. I care a lot about what they've gone through. And so I want to be a physician to be able to advocate for families like my own, and to be a physician and change the structure so that way people like my family don't have to keep experiencing these things, right? And so I think that comes with that kind of like lens in terms of who you are and why you are the way you are, focusing on yourself, right, is really, it does make you stand out because you are unique. You do have a unique story and a unique background, wherever, like, whatever that means, right? And so it's so I think that is really kind of like the main thing, of course, and then coupled with like, and why I can see how like why that shadowing experience is important to include, to say like, this is how I know physicians, being a physician will be able to like get me to my goals, to reach my goals. And a framing that I think is helpful is that when you have that like MD or DO degree, like two medical degrees, right, that are, that you're able to get, is like you do have that like the authority to be able to advocate for people more than just within their health, right? Of course, in the context of their health, but also within all of these other capacities. So you can talk to like why housing stability and food stability, like food access, is so incredibly important. And so you being able to touch on those things and why you care about those things, and how you know that MD or DO degree will help you accomplish like also those issues, if that's what you're interested in, if that's what you're passionate about, will make you incredibly unique. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Arna, do you want to say anything, or should I move on to the next question maybe? Okay, sounds good. This was an earlier question asked, and we may have touched upon it, but I just wanted to say it out loud. If you had both shadowing and clinical experiences, would you recommend adding both? And also, would you recommend adding hobbies? If so, what type of hobbies?
I can touch on the second one. I know Camila said that she added a hobby about flamenco. I also added a hobby of singing and performing, and so I made that into one section, and then I also did what Camila did and made it about like how this has shown my growth as a person and what I can do with that as a physician and what I learned, like transferable skills. And then definitely, like what Camila also stressed earlier, was that since a lot of people don't really get paid and like actually work, I mean, having a paid clinical experience means you were working, and so I personally would separate those. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just emphasize that, like, really just talk about what was important to you, and if both of them were important, then you should talk and have different meaning, then you should talk about them separately. I also, funny how we all did like performances, because I also did dance and that was my hobby. I did a lot of different orgs on campus, so instead of talking about, this is an example of merging it all together, because instead of talking about all three different orgs that I was a part of, it's like I'll just combine it into one activity, which was dance, and how that was important for me as a person. But
Camila, do you want to say anything about this as well?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, just echoing the both. I think including both is really valuable. Or all of it. Sorry, not very helpful. Yeah.
No problem. Yeah, we are at the 4-minute mark, and I think we have time for one more question, but there are a bunch in the chat. Savannah, I know you just raised your hand, but want to prioritize those that sent it earlier. Anna Lynn said, in order for your primary application to be complete, do you have to have all your letters of recommendations uploaded and submitted, or can this wait until secondaries?
Okay, so I don't remember like the technicality of it, but I would suggest submitting your letters of rec, like coupled with like your submission of the application. I think those letters are going to be something that are going to be read by admissions committees. So you definitely want them there to support you when they're looking over your application. Is there anyone else that would like to speak?
Okay, perfect. I'm going to link our email down in the chat if anyone has any other questions. You can feel free to email us. But Savannah, you can go ahead and ask your question out loud real quick as our last question of the night.
Hey, hi. I'm sorry if someone mentioned this and I didn't catch it, but how appropriate is it to mention activities that you did in high school if they're still like a huge part of who you are and helped shape you?
Go ahead, Aruna.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think if you had, if you still can have continued this high school experience, even in college, then I think it warrants a, I think it should have a section of what you did in college for this high school organization in your activity section, because I think it's important. And if you haven't had any experience in college with what you were doing in high school, but it was still a very formative experience for you, that can be an anecdote, a very short one probably, in your primary application or your personal statement, talking about how this has shaped you as a person, and and how that was important to your growth as a student and as a future physician. That Maricon, feel free to add.
No, I echo everything Haruna said.
Okay, I think, do we have time for one more question maybe? Okay, cool. Let me search up. Yeah, Alan said, how did you all manage the large influx of secondaries?
Yeah, I didn't manage it too well. I got advice from a lot of people, and so I just give advice to you. What I should have followed was this would maybe one of the only times I would maybe suggest looking into Reddit or into maybe SDN, just because they do have information about what were some past like secondary questions. But I would only do it just for that and nothing else. Because when you have like those information about the secondary prompts, and if you don't want to go to a student doctor network, which is SDN, you can also probably find that information on the school's website. But once you have those secondary, questions, you can start writing them and start editing them, have them get feedback if you can. And what's nice is that a lot of the questions can be reused. And so you will have like a repository or like a group of short answer questions that you already have prepared, and then you can copy and paste them. And I think one anomaly, or one, there were a few anomalies, but I can distinctly remember like one is UCSDs, where it asks you about an autobiography, and that was just like completely like left field, I felt like, for me. So
I can speak to this too. I think keeping really organized is really important. And so to give you some like context, like I ended up applying to like 31 schools, and that is literally way too much. Like I couldn't even keep up with secondaries. There was like, I think 2 schools that I missed the deadlines to. So like realistically, you have to think about feasibility as well as like how much it all costs. Like I paid through it. It was through student loans and then through moving back home and getting a job. And that was literally like my income. And so I think so thinking strategically about where exactly you want to apply, that we could, if you reach out, if you ever want to have questions about where you should apply, because there's definitely, I had a certain strategy to it. But keeping really organized with the secondaries and the prompts, I was able to do that through Word Doc or Google Docs. And so they have this like outline feature, right? And so I would essentially organize, it was like organized by region. And so it would be like, let's say like Northwest California schools, Texas school. I only went to one Texas school. It was like Southwest schools, Eastern Midwest schools. And then within each of those regions in the outline, I would then be able to like have another header saying in like schools, right? School names. And then within those school names, write out their individual prompts. And so at some point you become so incredibly immersed that you're able to kind of like search, edit, or search paste, like, find, search words, keywords that you remember from like different prompts. But that way, but having one localized area that you can just go to and like find, search certain words, certain prompts, so that way you can reuse them and just edit them is incredibly helpful. Yeah, I think for me that was the only way to do it. I tried to organize it in a different way, like based on prompt, and made a graph, and I ended up never using it because I couldn't keep up with it. But you definitely want to be careful and like enter the application as soon as you receive that email. Make sure you go in and check to see if there's like a date and a time for those deadlines, because there was definitely one school where I didn't realize there was a time deadline. So I went in on the day of to submit, and I had already passed the time deadline, and they didn't take my secondary. And so you do need to be very on it. And I think so I had that Word doc, but I also had an Excel sheet, and that was like with the names and with the due dates, and then another column of like submitted or like in progress. And then I also use that same Excel sheet to track like all of my rejections, and then, or like interviews or acceptance. You go through it. And so it is, having that kind of structure throughout your process is incredibly helpful. Yeah, at least it was for me.
Great. Thank you so much for coming. Before you all leave, I just really quickly wanted you all to answer some Zoom polls. It's 3 questions, very short. Let me just launch it really quick. It's going to help us a lot for future programming, and the feedback is really important also for what we could do otherwise. So let me just. Sorry, give me a second. Launch it, and then it'll take 2 seconds, and then we'll have a wonderful rest of our evening.
And please send, if you have a personal statement, please send it to that link. We have a few more spots left, and it's a great resource. I'll send it in the chat again.
Also in the chat, I just put in a link to a forum to access free MCAT resources from the Princeton Review. So that's there.
Great, thank you.
Yes, please fill out this poll. It's really helpful.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.